Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the Union of Mobile Advertising, Data Analytics, and Platforms. I'm Terrence Coles, the Senior Director of Supply Partnerships for the Americas here at Smaato, and I'll be your webinar's moderator. Today, we will hear from Forrester, Smaato, and Rocket Fuel, with a small Q&A session at the end of the broadcast. Some general housekeeping notes for the broadcast. You are joining as an audience member and are in listen-only mode, so you are muted. If you would prefer to join the session over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to our presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. A few last things before we get started. We'll be sending the presentation out to everyone after we're finished, so you'll all receive that in your inbox. Also, there's a brief survey at the end of the webinar. If you please take some time to answer a few quick questions about your webinar experience today, that would be greatly appreciated. So to start our webinar today, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Jennifer Wise, the Senior Analyst of Mobile Marketing, Ads, and Gamification at Forrester Research, who will start our presentations off. Jennifer?
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. So as you mentioned, I'm Jennifer Wise. I'm a Senior Analyst at Forrester Research, and I spend a lot of time looking at data about consumer behaviors, as well as looking at marketing technologies and the ad landscape. So today I'm going to present some of our findings on the state of mobile advertising, analytics, and platforms. On the next slide, we have a full agenda to cover. We'll start by answering the question of what is the state of mobile advertising today? Then we'll look at what does 2016 have in store for the mobile advertising landscape? What are some key trends that marketers and advertisers need to be on top of? And then look at how can advertisers be prepared. So first we'll start with what is the state of mobile advertising today? Next slide, we see that it's a fact. Mobile advertising is big, right? We probably all know this. This is why we're all on the phone today. We hear a lot about mobile in the news, within our companies, and a lot of us have probably been tasked with making sure that we have effective mobile strategies for our companies. We've passed the point as an industry of asking, does it matter? We know that it does. We know that people are glued to their smartphones today. In fact, data has shown that we glance or pick up our mobile phones 200 times a day to see something, to get something, or to do something. But just in case there's anyone who isn't sold or still needs convincing, I have some numbers to show you. So on the next slide, we see 3 billion. This is Forrester's forecast of the number of smartphones globally that we will have by the end of this year. On the next slide, we see 53 hours. This is the number of hours that people spend on their phones on average in a month. This is almost 2 hours a day that people spend engrossed in the content within their phones. And many people, including probably all of us on this phone, spend more time than that on our mobile devices. This brings us to the next slide, which has 25 apps. So based on data that Forrester collects from consumers' mobile phones, we've seen that the average smartphone owner accesses 25 different apps in the course of the month. So taken all together, we know that people are glued to their mobile devices, spend a lot of their time presenting many media opportunities on their mobile devices, and are doing this through a lot of different channels. But it's important to note that mobile adoption isn't slowing down. So on the next slide, we see that there is a global mobile revolution. It's still in its infancy in some markets, but it's going to accelerate in this next year. And by the end of 2016, Forrester forecasts that there will be 4.8 billion individuals globally that are using a mobile phone. And here we can see some numbers in specific markets. So overall, we predict that smartphone subscribers are going to be 46% of the global population by next year. And it's already reached more than that in some of these key geographies that we see here on this slide. On the next slide, we note that marketers and advertisers and many of us have taken note of this growing mobile adoption and are investing. So we see that mobile display is going to have the fastest growth trajectory of any ad spend that we see across other devices and channels within the next 5 years. And what that means is that mobile display spending is going to increase threefold between 2015, where we are today, and 2020. And by 2020, mobile display is going to surpass mobile search, meaning that marketers and advertisers are betting big in advertising, right, for their discovery and acquisition play. So as a whole, we can see that mobile advertising is ready for prime time, right? Consumers are spending time on their mobile devices. Budgets are going there. There's more and more mobile inventory available, and we've all seen a rise, right, in marketers not only spending more, but using programmatic and investing in the technologies to make it successful. So what do we see happening in the next year? Brings us to the next slide and our next agenda item, which is what does 2016 have in store for the mobile advertising landscape? What do advertisers need to be doing? So first, we see on the next slide that mobile can't exist in a silo. So mobile is difficult. Mobile advertising is hard. It was sort of this whole new beast of an advertising channel that marketers had to wrangle and get their heads around. There were different tracking mechanisms, a different form factor to adjust to. And because of that, we saw that marketers were using it as a separate entity from the rest of their efforts, right? Tackling mobile in a silo, putting a little bit of budget in their mobile ad spend, and just tracking clicks and conversions just within that device. But this year, that really needs to change as marketers begin to mature their strategies and also as their consumer continues to mature in their device usage. On the next slide, we introduce something that we've defined at Forrester as the mobile mind shift. So this is a shift that your consumers have gone through. And it's the expectation that I, as a consumer, can get what I want in my immediate context and moments of need. This means I expect any information or service to be available to me on any device of my choosing whenever it's convenient for me. And to make it even harder, I expect it to be contextually relevant and personally relevant to me. So this means that your consumer, this mobile consumer that you've been targeting, isn't just using their mobile device. In fact, on the next slide, we see that mobile is one of many devices. So here we surveyed online adults who go online weekly or more, and we asked them which of the following devices they use, either personally or via an employer. And we see that they have a lot of devices. So 2/3 still have their desktop, 72% are using their laptop, nearing half, 44%. Sorry about that, have their tablet, and a lot of them are using their smartphone. And on the next slide, we see that they use these devices simultaneously. So when we ask them to think about the last time they used more than one, we see that 2/3 of them have used their TV, half of them use their laptop while also using another device, as do about half of consumers use their mobile phone. So they are connected to multiple devices at the same time. And the implications for this for advertising can be good. It means you have the moment to reach them across multiple devices to enhance your message, but it also has implications for things like frequency capping. And on the next slide, see that they also use these devices sequentially. So we asked our users, which device did you start with the last time you switched devices during a task? And we can see that there's a lot of switching. So almost 1/3 of users started a task on their mobile phone and then picked it up at another device, such as their laptop or their desktop. Almost 1/4 of them did the same on their laptop. So what this means is that the impact of that ad or that brand touch point is going to carry across these multiple devices. Which brings us to our next slide, which is that advertising as a whole is getting harder. Because what you have to do is deal with new connections, so new technologies that are enabling new data and new moments to reach your consumer. which then boil up into new touch points, new devices such as mobile and tablet, which are complicating this cross-device story. And then on top of that, across all of these devices, we see a splintering of consumption, right? The media and the channels that they're using, such as social, right? Publishers. And all of this boils up into one consumer, right? That one consumer that has one brand experience across all of these touch points. So advertisers have their work cut out for them. And what this means is that you have to piece together this picture and understand what this means for frequency caps, for right time, right message, and for coordinating your messages and tracking attribution. Which brings us to the next trend that we see on this next slide, which is that identification and analytics are the cornerstone of success. So we see that you have to deliver great cross-channel campaigns, and you have to be able to measure that impact. And this is something that stumps marketers today. So in a recent survey that we fielded of mobile marketers, we asked them, does your firm track mobile users across other channels? And we see that only 31% aren't tracking their users across any other channel. So if that user has that impression on mobile and then goes to another device, you completely lose that customer journey. And you lose that attribution path. So the knowledge of that same user is missing and able to retarget or identify across channels, and that impact of that ad won't be accounted for. Which also brings us to our next slide, the fact that when we're thinking about the impact of ads, only a small minority have KPIs in place. So here we asked our mobile marketers, which of the following practices do you employ to measure the success of your mobile program? And we see here in the second bar that 56% have identified the KPIs to measure their progress against their objectives. So that's good, that's more than half, but that still means that almost half, that other 44%, don't have the KPIs in place to even be able to track that attribution path too, right? What is the real impact of that ad? What is it driving success? Is it an in-store purchase? Is it a click? Is it an engagement metric online? So on the next slide, we see sort of the mandate that we have for mobile advertisers, which is that you have to build bridges between devices and users in this next year. This is something that has seemed impossible to all marketers and almost for ad tech as well, sort of in past years. How do you connect the dots between mobile, which doesn't have that cookie that's been so tried and true and tested for display? And without that, how are you going to track this user as they see that ad on that smartphone and then browse that product on their tablet and then also see an email and ultimately go in store and purchase with their card? But that's been cracked today, and it's possible. We have deterministic solutions that can connect that user using self-identified information and provided information, such as an app login or connecting an email address across different devices and connecting it with a loyalty card. And then we also have probabilistic solutions that exist today, which rely on things such as sort of cookie matching, location-based IDs, device matching to piece together a picture of a user as they traverse across channels using some assumptions that will be made but are still fairly reliable today. So marketers this year have to understand that they can bridge between devices and users and will be tasked with doing so to prove attribution as well as to enhance targeting. And then finally on the next slide, we see that user experience matters. This is something that is so key today. And in the next slide, what that means is that mobile ads can't be repurposed display ads. Mobile requires relevant integrated ads. Now what this means in terms of format, that you want to evolve from that standard banner which covers the content on the screen and frustrates the mobile user to using mobile-specific types of formats, which are things like video and rich media, which sort of match the interactivity that consumers are used to on their mobile device, to then getting into these publisher-specific formats, which is another way for saying native. So it really matches that user experience and is much less interruptive for that user. And then in terms of targeting, it means advancing from beyond just that basic segmentation to actually delivering on the user's expectation of contextual relevancy. So using real-time data and becoming more personalized and ultimately predictive. And that requires leveraging first-party data, third-party data, as well as publisher data where possible. And on the next slide, we see that platforms are vying to deliver on this. Right, a lot of marketers went into programmatic because it seemed an easy way to access a lot of inventory and sort of help with the bidding of that inventory to serve ads. And programmatic is great because it provides big scale for advertisers. But when you begin to think of that user experience, there are other types of platforms that are available as well. So we have private marketplaces which manage premium inventory and data. Now this means that you're more likely to have access to those native types of formats as well as to potentially that publisher data to put into that engine to do more targeted ads. And then we also see direct to publisher, right, which provides a really highly integrated mobile ad experience and access to data as well. So on the next slide, we ask, how can advertisers be prepared? On the next slide, we see this. It is time to remove these, to remove the rose-colored glasses. So everyone loves mobile. Everyone has gone in to mobile advertising and has invested in technologies that they think can deliver. But now marketers are mandated to ask those tough questions to make sure that they're actually providing the best ad experience to their users and seeing the best results for themselves. So on the next slide, I have 3 key categories of questions that marketers should be asking when they go into a mobile ad program. So first are questions around inventory. So what devices are included? So through a partner, what devices do you have access to? Is it just mobile, or do you have access to different screens? And what reach is possible? So what is the scalability of that platform and the range of audience that you can reach? And also how does that translate into global implementations as well? Then we have identification and analytics. So how are they identifying individuals for targeting, and how do you bridge channels for attribution? We know that there are solutions in place, so we begin to ask partners how they do it to enhance your targeting, and also what are the limitations and assumptions that they're making when piecing together the picture. And then ultimately the ad experience. So what publishers, formats, and data do you have access to through this partner to make sure that you're providing that best user experience to your customer? And with that, thank you for that time in this research, and I will hand it off.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Great presentation, and anybody who has questions, again, you can type those in to the question pane, and we'll be answering those in the short Q&A session following that. Now I'd like to introduce Ajitpal Pannu, the Chief Business Officer here at Smaato. Ajitpal?
Thanks, Terrence. So before I think we go in and talk about how mobile advertising is actually going beyond one screen, let's talk a little bit about the history, if you will. Looking at phase 1, so we kind of broke this down into 3 phases. Phase 1 being the early days of mobile, and then obviously mobile reaching some sort of scale. What were we talking about, or what is the issue we were addressing for mobile publishers, if you will, was they had very little direct sales. They needed to monetize the inventory, if you will, on their given apps and mobile websites, if you will. And essentially, very early adopters were mobile-specific demand-side platforms. Looking at 3 years back, we probably had approximately around 40 or so connected DSPs inside our ecosystem. What exactly was going on at that time? There's a lot of inventory flowing. Everybody wanted to figure out ways of monetizing. Not every single app is built with in-app purchases in mind, if you will. So that's kind of the issue we initially faced, where there's a lot of impressions coming in. They were filling this with direct sales. Programmatic is probably the major source of monetization for those publishers. However, that didn't stop there. As Jennifer mentioned in the previous slides, we're about to reach 3 billion smartphone users by end of this year. 3 years ago, that number was probably 1 billion or so, if you will. Go to the next slide. Then talking about phase 2. What happened within the last, I would say, 18 months or so? We reached a lot of scale. A lot of inventory growth that happened inside the ecosystem. Obviously, a lot of mobile-specific demand-side platforms kept on growing, but then at the same time, all the major players in the online display or desktop world also wanted to, come in, and they started plugging into the entire environment, if you will. And a lot of this was driven by advertisers, obviously, interest in advertising on mobile devices. As this slide kind of speaks for itself, the space got really crowded. So you have a lot of demand that's coming in to the space, a lot of demand that's coming in at very low price points, if you will, because a lot of this was going on around spray and pray type of mechanism, if you will. And then obviously traffic kept on growing. What does this translate into, as we kind of started hearing a lot more about this, is low-quality ads, and essentially inside the user experience side of things, overload of ads for a given user on mobile. And where are we? What's kind of the phase we're entering? Probably within the last 2-3 months or so, and obviously for the next 12 months. First and foremost, I think we're focusing very much on quality. I think this is a topic that's being brought up, not only just around quality of inventory, but then also quality of ads that are being presented to users. How do you achieve that goal? Most importantly, data plays a very important role there, and then obviously advertisers and the interest from advertisers, brand dollars also starting to come into the space, and everyone looking at mobile as a primary screen. On quality side of things, first and foremost, premium inventory packaging through the PMP deal IDs is obviously an easy way to do this because this has worked and it has been operational inside the desktop environment. However, it does not address all the different methods or all the different fill points within a publisher's inventory stack. You obviously have premium inventory that can be packaged, at premium prices. But then at the same time, you also have everything that's non-premium inventory where a lot of the scale resides inside mobile. And then I think the second topic is formats. Obviously, you have all the historical formats such as 325/50s, interstitials. But then the latest ones that have kind of risen to the top is you have a native ad unit, essentially meaning you have a custom ad unit that can fit around a user experience. All of this requires your ability to target, your ability to also display an ad unit where it makes the most sense. One of the critical points there is data, first-party data that comes from a publisher that's being collected by a user, and then your ability to leverage that data to not only target the content around the different given context, if you will, for an ad unit, but then also your ability to go back and optimize that given ad impression, if you will, based on that data. And then finally, on the advertiser side of things, you still have the demand-side platforms. You have demand-side platforms that are gaining a lot of traction. There's a big ask from advertisers that's coming in, and that's really revolving around. They're not only focused on mobile as just the screen. They're also interested in seeing which touch point outside of mobile or another screen might have had an impact in regards to a given consumer responding to their ad experience. And I think there's a lot of questions. So net, where exactly are we going with all this? More and more, we're seeing a trend which is native advertising, and native advertising that is essentially gaining a lot of adoption, and then it's bringing a unique value proposition to the given audiences. So what we have here is looking at two different type of campaigns. A campaign that was, probably a majority of campaign types 12 to 18 months back, and then obviously a campaign that reflects what's kind of coming through the ecosystem or coming through the pipes on the same amount of inventory, same regions, same countries, but then obviously it translates into a return for a given publisher. So first one is really a message is displayed, and a message is displayed for all audiences. Does not have a lot of flexibility. You do still have the ability to launch this in a programmatic world from one location, but then target multiple different audiences across the globe, depending on what the campaign goals are. This one specifically was a gaming advertiser, and an advertiser's goal was user acquisition, and they essentially were are running this campaign in kind of a spray and pray fashion. So really looking for cheap inventory, but then also looking for return on investment on that inventory by tracking some sort of CPIs or click-through rate-based targeting. The campaign on the right, which is a U.S. advertiser, it is an automotive company, and their goal was also to target global audiences. However, they essentially are leveraging one format, but then controlling the multiple assets inside the format based on all the given targeting criteria. If it is within the U.S., if it is males, females, and then obviously certain age groups and any other parameters they have access to that are being passed to them, and their ability to target a given campaign and given assets inside that given campaign globally from one centralized location. Historically, all of this was done by media buying teams in different countries, different regions. This is essentially a campaign for a given vehicle that's being launched from the U.S., and it's essentially targeting multiple regions or multiple countries, if you will, across the globe. So what exactly goes behind a native ad unit? From our point of view, first and foremost, obviously sticking to the same theme of quality, data, and advertisers. When we're talking about quality, really, two key things, which is the content and the context. This is a very publisher-driven topic, if you will, and a publisher's ability to not only control and have access to the controls for their inventory based on the content, but then also the context the user is viewing that content in, and essentially leveraging all of that to display an advertisement. And then one of the key parameters there obviously is data. What does data do for a given publisher? It allows them to target. It allows them to target based on location, gender, or age, if you will. And then the third parameter is obviously who pays for majority of the bills, if you will, and that's the advertiser. Advertisers really looking for value. How do they translate that value? They translate the value based on a message, interaction, and some sort of ROI. In order for all of that to happen, a publisher also needs access to a platform, needs access to tools that give them the ability to essentially present their inventory quality based on content and context, target that inventory based on data, that is location, gender, or age, and then essentially allow the advertiser the controls around the assets that demonstrate the value based on a message, interaction, or some sort of other ROI that a given advertiser is looking into when they're running their campaign. So how does this all come together? I think we asked ourselves the question, and we ask ourselves the question that how do we display this to the attendees of this webinar without making this a Smaato sales pitch? And that really comes down to is you need access to a platform. So a platform we built within the last 12 to 18 months that was essentially looking into compiling three things. First and foremost, a publisher's ability to control their inventory, a publisher's ability to manage their inventory in a simple ad server. However, ad server that is built with two key things in mind. First and foremost, your ability to manage your demand across all different channels. It could be direct demand, indirect demand that's coming through programmatic sources. It could be deal ID, PMP functionality, but then also, more importantly, in areas where programmatic still hasn't reached the levels of scale, working with given ad networks, if you will, and you're essentially managing all the entire demand stack inside one platform, and what we call this is dynamic demand. That's one. And then second is obviously mobile, and especially a publisher in the mobile ecosystem, the ability to essentially access a platform that is demand loaded, that comes equipped with demand sources, has access to demand sources, and it essentially is able to start monetizing that inventory. However, that does not solve the problem we're facing today, and majority of the message or the ask from publishers is, how do I bring my multiple screens, audiences that are on multiple screens together, and how do I have the ability, the controls of not only controlling the message, but also controlling the targeting, and also being able to control the analytics and data that I'm collecting around those audiences, around advertising, around every single thing that's generating money or monetization for me inside one platform. And that's really kind of where it leads into the direction of that it's not just your ability to serve and manage your inventory, but it's also your ability to live in a world that is not cookie dependent and a world that allows you to run your campaigns across multiple screens. And some of those key multiple screens essentially being your ability to run this on a mobile device and your ability to run on anywhere else if a user is spending a lot of their time. With that said, I think we'll probably hear more from an advertiser's perspective after this.
No, thank you very much, Ajitpal, and great perspective. Again, if any of you have questions, feel free to put them in the questions pane, and we will address that in the short Q&A session after our next speaker. We have Ian Dailey, who's in product marketing from Rocket Fuel, to give us a perspective from the advertiser point of view. Ian?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Terrence. Very excited to be here this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Again, my name is Ian Dailey. I'm from the product marketing team at Rocket Fuel. I focus mostly on mobile and direct response products. And if you're not familiar with Rocket Fuel, we are on the demand side. So we run a managed media service with both brand and direct response solutions, as well as a SaaS-based business with self-serve DSP and data management platform, DMP. And what I'm here to talk about today is around driving real results using cross-device. And Jennifer brought up the topic of cross-device earlier in this webinar, talking about how we can stop planning mobile in a silo, thinking of mobile as, yes, the primary screen, but one of the many screens that we use in a given day. We're constantly switching devices, and how can we plan in a way that makes sense, and how can we track and attribute consumers, in their activities online across all of the different touch points, so that we're not cookie dependent, as Ajitpal brought up, and we can really understand how all this fits together. So if we think about cross-device and what it means, I like to think of cross-device as a really technical term that really means bringing all these IDs together under one unified ID or one umbrella that we can think about a consumer holistically. And what that means is that we're going to focus on people and not on their devices or, in fact, their individual device IDs. We know that many devices have multiple IDs with them. Think of two browsers open up within the same computer, or you have the cookie space on a smartphone as well as the app space, and you have different IDs associated with both. And that presents a real problem. And the problem that we have today is that these IDs specifically, the number of IDs out there with the connected consumers in the United States has exploded. If you look back to 2003, you have 133 million adults online that have 138 million devices, and in fact about 274 million IDs. And this is talking specifically about addressable IDs, so connected IDs where we can serve advertising to. And as you see, this is growing, exponentially on the ID front. Growing all the way up, we project in 2018 to 239 million connected adults, which are associated with 1.8 billion IDs. So you're seeing connected adults growth rate at 80% over these years, but these IDs are growing at 560%. And where we are today, 2014, 2015, is that the average connected adult, we estimate, has 6.4 addressable IDs connected with them. So that's a real problem. That's a real problem because if you're measuring how people are interacting on those devices, you're making decisioning on what to bid on if you're a demand platform like Rocket Fuel, or if you're understanding consumer behavior and you're only looking at one ID at a time, you're really missing out. You're only looking at a sliver of what that person looks like online, which is not really an issue that we faced 10 years ago. We were focused on devices, but that was okay. Now if you're focused on devices, you're really missing the point. And that's exactly what Jennifer was bringing up ahead of time, how we need to figure out how to track across devices. So that's the one problem, is that you can't plan in silos. You need to connect all these IDs. And the other side is on measurement. And where we are today is that we're in a de facto land of measuring consumer behavior on a single device basis. And that does a huge disservice to mobile, and I'll explain why. So as we see at Rocket Fuel, we're a multi-channel DSP, so we plan across desktop and mobile. Mobile's a huge growing area and going to be, a huge percentage of our business, already is and will likely exceed 50% soon. But where we see is actually still most of the conversions, most of advertiser conversions are happening on the desktop. And there's various reasons for that. Bigger screens, we're used to them. If there's a lot of forms to fill out, that sort of thing. So what happens in the single device universe is that if your conversion is happening on desktop, you get a very skewed a picture of what the conversion pathway looks like. And so it looks something like this, with impression and click activity across desktop devices, and you're always going to give credit to a desktop device. And that's fundamentally not right, because the conversion pathway probably looks a lot more complicated. Jennifer presented information that shows that people are switching devices. That's common behavior. We're all doing it. We all have multiple devices, and you might pick up your tablet first. You might put that down. You might hop on your computer, do a little bit more research, and then be reminded later on your smartphone. And what the multi-device or the cross-device view, or the people-centric view, allows you to do is finally give credit where credit is due. And in the last touch world, you can give credit to mobile. And this is a huge shift. This is, I can't underestimate how big of a shift this is, because mobile sits in the middle of these conversion pathways. Our studies show it, multiple studies show it, but we haven't been giving credit to mobile. And so as we switch to a multi-device view or a person-centric view, you get a better picture. And this, because the existing view, frankly, overvalues desktop and undervalues mobile. So what we did at Rocket Fuel, just to understand how much we were undervaluing mobile in our existing campaigns, we did a little research. And we analyzed more than 3,000 campaigns in our platform. And we simply applied cross-device attribution. What does it mean if I show an impression on mobile and the conversion happens on desktop? If I can count that, if I can give credit to mobile, what happens? And we found that, on average, mobile ROI goes up by 12%. And this is, I almost like to present this as an accidental thing. We weren't even trying to drive cross-device conversions. This wasn't something that our platform was designed to do. I mean, we've taken steps since then, but just on accident, we found that people were converting across devices. And as an industry, basically at minimum, we're undervaluing mobile by 12%. And so if you think in a cross-screen world, we should be spending a lot more money in mobile. Even though mobile is huge, mobile's big, it should be even bigger in terms of where the dollars are spent. So that kind of presents the two problems. We've got a lot of IDs out there. We need to stitch those IDs together, and we need to fundamentally assign ROI in a way that makes more sense in this multi-screen, multi-device world. So let's talk about what you can do with cross-device identification, cross-device targeting, cross-device optimization, and cross-device measurement, all these different topics under one umbrella. So we like to talk about the difference between optimization and targeting. And I think the world, if you talk to most advertisers out there, and when I certainly speak with our customers, they're mostly talking about, well, how can I find and reach people across devices? And that's kind of, I say that's good for an upper funnel goal. If you're talking about targeting and consumer reach, it allows you to go back to your boss or allow you to go back to your client and say, hey, I reached 35% of our desktop audience on mobile. That's really nice. That's an admirable thing if you know that you want to reach people across devices. Or I increased multi-device exposure by 42%. But if you're in the mid or lower funnel, you don't want these proxy KPIs about engagement and clicks and that sort of thing. You want to see real conversions. And so optimization is really the thing that can allow you to go back to that relevant stakeholder and say, hey, guess what? I actually drove 300 more conversions last week or last month by using cross-device, and that had a real impact on our top line. And that's what we at Rocket Fuel and I believe the industry needs to move towards. And I think everybody understands that we need to be able to measure these lower funnel things, because display, especially in mobile, has a central role in driving all conversions online. So let's present this through a case study that we put together just to illustrate how this can happen. So we at Rocket Fuel had an Advertiser. They were a subscription-based mobile app. They had a service where you had to pay a monthly fee, and the goal was very lower funnel. They wanted to drive new subscriptions. make sense. The KPIs were cost per subscription, and they had a viewability goal in there as well. The standard creative was IAB. The standard banners, unfortunately, not native. I'm very excited for what native holds in the future. I believe that's going to be a big area and one area that I'm going to be focusing on a lot. And the reporting that they were really interested in was, look, I don't care about device-centric conversions. I don't care how many conversions were within one device. That doesn't make any sense. Let's look at how many conversions we drove at the person level. So no matter where the ad was served or where the conversion happened, I'm going to count it as long as it should get the credit. And so that was great. So we said, let's look at performance by device, and let's institute some cross-device tactics here. And the interesting thing here with this advertiser is they were an app-based service. So you could download their app from the App Store or the Google Play Store, and obviously you're going to be using that on your mobile device, either smartphone or tablet. But the subscription signups were happening through the web. And they expected most of those to come through either desktop computers in the browsers like Chrome or Safari, or on a tablet. And so they had this fundamental kind of conundrum where it's like we have app-based users, but we're driving subscriptions through the web, so what do we do there? And cross-device is really the idea. It's like these are two different ID sets, these are two different worlds. Let's figure out how to bring them all together and drive these conversions for this person. So let's talk about how cross-device optimization can happen. And I try to make this generic so it's not all about rocket fuel and how this can work for the whole industry. And to be clear, what I'm mostly talking about here, the addressable devices, while that first graph showed wearables and addressable TV, the addressable devices that we're talking about today at scale are smartphones, tablets, and desktops. So that's where this media is being served. So to drive cross-device performance, it starts at the nucleus. It starts with this concept of your cross-device connections. Is it a deterministic set? Is it a probabilistic set, etc.? You start with the connections because that powers everything. The thing that you can build with these cross-device connections, and this is really the key concept that can drive optimization, is the concept of a cross-device profile. We like to call them unified profiles. Now, why these are so powerful is that when at Rocket Fuel we see a bid request coming from Smaato, we look at all of the data associated with that particular ID. Now, if I look at that ID and I have, 10 points of data, that's good, and I can use that data to make smarter decisions. How much to bid, should I bid, et cetera, which client should go to. But if I can build a cross-device profile, if I can look at all of the IDs associated with that mobile ID, then I have a much richer data set to make a better decision. So instead of 10 points, perhaps I now have 30 points. I can make a smarter decision at scale, meaning I can drive more efficiency. I can see things like, oh, maybe that cookie had demonstrated something, that desktop cookie had demonstrated something that I think that's going to drive a real good result. I can apply all the data, demographic, behavioral, historical, etc. So I have more data at my disposal, so when you plug it into your optimization technology, it has more to work off of. And now what this optimization technology is actually designed to do now is not drive necessarily a mobile conversion. If I see a mobile bid request, now I don't have to drive a mobile conversion. I can drive that conversion across mobile and desktop, across all the different mobile devices that that consumer owns. And when you can attribute it, when you have a system that actually can do that attribution, then your system can get smarter and really really take off. So the concept of a profile with more data and an optimization technology that is trying to drive cross-device conversions are the real cornerstones of how you can drive performance beyond targeting. So let's look at how this campaign performed. So this is very interesting because actually this data comes from DoubleClick. So it actually doesn't come from Rocket Fuel's internal systems. This came from a neutral third party. DoubleClick as an ad server now supports cross-device attribution globally. So what we found is on a single device basis, this campaign drove nearly 600 conversions over this time period with a CPA of $176. But when we said, okay, DoubleClick, tell us about the cross-device conversions, because that's what we were actually trying to drive. That number jumps from 600 to more than 930. The difference of a 56% lift in conversions, because now we're looking people-centrically and not, I might have made up that word, people-centric way rather than device-centric way. And the CPA has a commensurate drop of 36%. So we're driving much more efficient conversions and much more conversions for the same spend. Now, the advertiser also wanted to know how these conversions were spread across devices. So this is a pretty interesting graph, and I'll quickly explain it. What you have on the rows are actually where the ads were shown, the ad exposure device. So this is what's going to get the credit, whereas the columns here are actually showing where the conversion took place. So I'll help you understand this. If you look at these blue boxes here, you can think of these as the single device conversions. An ad shown on the smartphone, where the conversion happened on the smartphone, that was 26%. An ad shown on desktop, conversion on desktop, that was 8%. So that's really interesting. You can see that most of the conversions here were on the single device way. But you can see all these other black cells in there are actually cross-device conversions. You'll see 15% conversions on desktop that were influenced by ads from a smartphone. And all of those black cells are the additional conversions that we're able to drive by thinking at the person level. So you can see that nearly 2/3 were on the single device basis, whereas 1/3 were on the cross-device basis. And here's the other interesting thing. If you look at where the conversions happened, they were actually pretty spread out. 31%, 38%, 33%, roughly a third per device type. But if you look at what got the credit, where were the ads shown, you can see that desktop hardly gets any credit, in fact. And they didn't know this. They expected a lot of conversions to come from desktop because it was web-based conversions. And we found that smartphone was actually the top performer. Smartphone, while only having 26% of the single device conversions, were actually driving 47% of the total conversions. And so these are the type of insights that you can get when you don't think in a way where you're predetermining where you should spend by channel. You allow the systems to freely spend money by channel and find the most optimal way to spend the dollars. So that's basically how we think about cross-device optimization and how cross-device can work for mid and lower funnel goals. Again, my name is Ian Dailey, and you can reach me at these addresses.
Thank you very much, Ian. Great and very insightful. Everyone, if you do have any questions for any of our guests today, feel free to send them in the questions panel, and we'll get to those. Also, remember there's a brief survey at the end of this webinar. I want to start off with just a couple of questions. The first question I want to send is really to all of you, but so there's been different presentations and different thoughts around the KPIs. So if each of you might take a moment, and I'll go around just to think about what you consider to be the key KPIs that people should take away as it goes to cross-device. And I'll start with you, Jennifer.
Yeah, so that is a great question, especially because as the data has shown, setting the right KPIs is an imperative thing to do at the very beginning of a campaign in order to understand what the result has been. And when it comes to advertising, as you spoke about, now that we can connect the dots, you can actually tie that ad impression back to a financial metric. So the first step that we suggest that marketers and advertisers take when measuring these KPIs is to do a customer journey map. So what is the role of each ad campaign, and then what is the path that customer may take? So is the function of that ad on mobile to get their attention, in which case you want to look at something such as impressions served, maybe a click or a micro conversion, right, that took place. And then do they go to desktop to explore? And then do they go in store to buy? So understand the impact that each device has across that customer journey, and then apply a holistic KPI, right? So ultimately tie it back to financial metric, but also come up with what we call micro conversions. So how you can measure if each device is accomplishing its role in that customer journey, whether it's the initial impression for discover, whether it's the device in which they explore, and then whether it's the device in which they buy. So I suggest an overall financial metric with this attribution mapping has enabled, as well as those micro conversion benchmarks along the way.
Oh, that's great insight, Jennifer. What would you say, Ajitpal?
So I'll give you a publisher's perspective, and I think the most important KPI for a publisher is a revenue per impression.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. It's all about making money from the publisher perspective. So Ian, from the advertiser perspective, who is spending the money that the publishers ultimately want to make, what would be the KPIs that you see that the advertisers have to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I fully, from the advertiser perspective, I fully agree with what Jennifer had said. I think we desperately need to get away from click metrics as something that it is going to drive the business. There are micro conversions if we can measure engagement for upper funnel goals. We run a lot of campaigns where we're trying to drive foot traffic. So if there's a foot traffic measurement that you can track in store, if that's your business, let's get to something that means a lot more than a click, because clicks, really, we have a minority of consumers who are actively trying to click, and if we're optimizing to clicks, we're kind of actively going after very clicky inventory. And that really doesn't suit advertiser goals. And I would say just, it's important for advertisers to also think about things like if you're running an upper funnel goal, an awareness goal, don't ask to optimize to the very lower funnel end conversion, because that's something that is going to throw you off as well. If you're trying to drive lower funnel things, I think we've got, especially in the cross-device world, we have companies like ad servers like DoubleClick and Atlas that are now able to measure cross-device conversions, kind of a neutral third party. I've heard of companies like Seismic and others that are jumping on board, and they're going to be able to provide person-level reporting. And that's great for the lower funnel online conversions. But let's make real KPIs and real metrics that make sense for the campaign.
No, it sounds like one of the real keys is going to be this user data and attribution of the audience that you bring up. And again, Smaato's getting into the user store world. But again, it's marrying that data to the holistic part there that's going to get much more to the audience. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So one other question that I have is, wait, I got a question in that says, how does the KPI viewability actually impact ROI for advertisers? So I think we'll start with Ian in terms of viewability is often driven from the advertiser side, although we as publisher side folks have to make sure our publishers deliver that. But how does viewability factor for you as a KPI?
I mean, viewability is an important KPI. I think you need to look at it more or less importantly, or more or less closely, depending on what your ultimate goal is. We found across our platform that if you institute a high viewability threshold, that it doesn't necessarily translate into better ROI from an attribution standpoint. There are many reasons for that. Essentially, there are ad impressions, say on a mobile web page, that happen lower on the page, and viewability kind of dings that says, okay, that's not valuable, but in fact it is valuable because those are often viewable. But the system, the systems that are designed to drive high viewability will stop bidding on that. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It's just not maximized for viewability. And so we find that on our platform, it's good to have an idea of a viewability goal of what you want to have, but oftentimes I think we get in the way of ourselves by instituting like a really high threshold for viewability, where it's really not driving maximum ROI, especially when you're talking about the very kind of bottom of the funnel stuff.
No, that's a really great perspective, and it sounds like much more to Jennifer's point, it's about holistic pieces, and I think it's working together between the advertiser and the publisher to establish a threshold with the broader context in mind. It seems to be very much isolated. Publishers get told we have to have things that are viewable, but yet you don't get monetized, and yet that's not the only piece. So it sounds like a holistic dialogue around what the objectives are. Needs to be the rest. Well, thank you. That question came from T. Bell. Thank you very much for that question. We have another question from Anuj Gupta, who says, given that mobile display ads will overtake mobile search, is Google under a major threat? And I don't know who I want to lob that to, but Jennifer, do you have a perspective? And we'll come back to this one.
Yes, I love that question, especially because that's something we've been talking about a lot here at Forrester in light of Apple's new update with ad blockers and what does this mean for the ecosystem and all of the players. So the answer is No, right? There's a lot of things at play here. But advertising spend is going to increase, and that's going to be from a variety of factors, right? Because targeting is going to become more granular and thus potentially more expensive, right? Inventory may be capped as they do frequency capping or as publishers work out native formats. So the actual cost of an ad impression may potentially be going up in the future, right? There's lots of factors at play that are going to push advertising higher. So it's not that search impressions are going to decrease or that marketers are going to stop investing in paid search. And also they serve different functions, right? You have someone with a layer of intent when you're doing search, whereas advertising is trying to get in front of someone completely new, right? Create that serendipity of targeting with them. And as well, I will also say too, when we're talking specifically about Google, a lot of their revenue model comes from paid search, but also advertising as well on their web properties. So Google will be intact. They will be doing well. But yeah, there's a lot of moving parts when we look at the industry. What is Google doing? What is Apple doing? What are standards about advertising? How does thinking about the user experience and targeting in these new formats that we've discussed today sort of change what advertising on mobile may be in the future? That's my long-winded answer.
No, that's great. Another comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to kind of basic economic factors of supply and demand. The supply is there, the eyeballs are there, we know the consumers are there. There's tons of data to show that the consumers are there, and it really comes down to the demand from the advertising side. And as we show through the concept of cross-device measurement and being able to really understand the ROI of mobile and advertiser, comfort with the ability to drive a mobile conversion or set up a mobile website or develop the mobile app to the way it needs to be, then those dollars will flow. So yeah, there's a kind of a short-term glitch for them where their revenue per impression is low, or the revenue per click for the search side is lower than it would be on desktop. But I expect that to kind of level out and not be a huge concern. But it takes time, and of course that has big financial implications for them in the short term.
Got it. So one other question that sort of came in, and I think we've talked a lot about probabilistic versus deterministic models, and so Ajitpal, from a ad server or Smaato perspective, and user store and the rest, you want to talk a little bit about probabilistic versus deterministic and sort of kick it around in terms of data that gets provided at that level?
Sure. So I think obviously probabilistic is very much tied to projections. And then I think deterministic is tied very much to reality and your ability to collect that data and your ability to essentially target as well as track the impact. But I think that all of this also ties back to everything where we talk about conversions, CTRs, viewability as well. And I think some of this we're talking about what's happened historically, right, versus what's going to happen in the future. I think as we talked about phase 1 and phase 2, phase 1 everybody was talking about programmatic and everybody was talking about mobile and programmatic. Phase 2, obviously there's tons of volume and everybody was complaining about bad ads, bad quality, and so on and so forth. And I think in phase 3, given the adoption of your ability to kind of control the message around content, context, and then leverage data, and especially if it is first-party data, right? That's really wherever user store, data store comes into play here for publishers, is their ability to package first-party audience segments and their ability to assign a price to those first-party audience segments and ability to monetize their inventory by passing that data. But then also, not only just from a targeting point of view, but also from a retargeting point of view, and that's really where this, Smaato ID, device ID, and any other metric that can be used on the demand side comes and plays into the picture. So all of that really translates back to is you're not aiming to monetize billions and billions of impressions. You're really aiming to monetize, a few hundred million or slightly less volume, but this is high quality volume and kind of goes along with the path of quality inventory, data, and then eventually value to the advertiser. And I think that kind of falls under the deterministic bucket versus probability of everything else, the type of results you're expecting, because I think anytime you have expectations, most likely they're not going to be met.
Yeah. And so, Ian, would you like to comment on what you see probabilistic, deterministic, and how you guys connect the dots and measure that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so at Rocket Fuel, I'll talk about what we do is we use a probabilistic approach. The approach, and there's very good reasons for that. I mean, first of all, when we talk about the idea of running programmatic media and driving results at scale globally, we're talking about the realm of billions of devices. We need to connect things at scale because it's not going to work for us. I mean, certainly, 10 million devices connected is interesting, but that's not the same as 2, 3, 4 billion devices that are going to work globally, because we want to be able to make these solutions work everywhere. And so, but I mean, certainly there's an interesting dialogue happening between deterministic and probabilistic. Most companies that have deterministic, and you have a hard time achieving that type of scale. The companies that do have that type of scale are keeping it to themselves. It's not kind of an open standard that can be used off platform, or maybe it's just used for measurement only. And so yeah, I think that leads to a discussion about accuracy and reach and that type of thing. And everybody's kind of quoting different numbers out there. We tend to focus on results. So from our side, if you can look at what it means from an optimization perspective, and you see better results in the end, then that speaks for itself. If you're strictly talking about targeting, I have somebody with data associated with this profile, and I want to reach them and only them. I'm trying to minimize waste. Then accuracy is paramount importance. And so there's room for both. I mean, certainly I think that's just the way it is. But if you do want to achieve that type of scale that's going to work beyond a few million consumers, in most cases, you're going to have to look probabilistically.
Got it. Well, thank you very much. And it sounds like from a data perspective, the scale is in probabilistic. For us at Smaato, at least for the publisher side, if we can get as deterministic as possible to find the right users, then there's a win-win in terms of the revenue versus the reach. And hopefully, Jennifer at Forrester, you guys can help us to battle it out and come up with something in the middle for what the industry looks like. But I want to thank you all. I'm sorry we ran out of time for the rest of the questions. It is just 1 minute after 11. So in respecting the time for the webinar, I want to thank you very much, Jennifer Wise, coming to us as a senior analyst from Forrester. I want to thank you, Ajitpal, as our Chief Business Officer here at Smaato, and thank you very much, Ian Dailey, as our product marketing person coming to us from Rocket Fuel. Thank you all for joining this webinar today, and please fill out the short survey at the end of the webinar.
Thank you.